In the endless crucible of the long war, where sanity was as precious as ammunition, and memory a double-edged sword, certain individuals rose from the ashes of shattered minds to embody the Imperium's desperate resolve. One such figure was Commander Valerius, a tactical genius of the Imperial Guard, forged in the brutal fires of the Mnemovore's psychological warfare. He was not a space marine, nor a powerful psyker, but a simple human, albeit one of extraordinary resilience and cunning, whose personal journey against the Mind Thief became a legend whispered amongst the beleaguered defenders of the Segmentum Obscurus. Valerius had been present at the fall of Xylos Prime, a young captain whose first command was annihilated by the very psychic echoes of his troops' fears. He had survived the Veritas Accord, witnessing firsthand the betrayal of trust and the collapse of unity, his own mind scarred by insidious whispers of past failings. He bore the marks of the Mnemovore's touch, not as physical wounds, but as a profound, almost pathological understanding of its methods. He knew its insidious reach, for it had reached deep into his own mind, plucked out his moments of doubt, his fear of failure, and the painful memory of a younger sister lost to a planetary plague, using these against him in battle. Unlike many who succumbed to madness or despair, Valerius cultivated an unusual, dangerous resilience. He learned to compartmentalize his mind, to recognize the subtle nuances of Mnemovore projections, and to steel himself against the echoes of his own past. He understood that fighting the Mnemovore with conventional tactics was like battling smoke with a sword. It required something entirely different. It required deception, not just of the enemy, but of himself. His great gambit unfolded during the desperate defense of the agri-world of Viridia Secundus, a crucial food source for a vast network of imperial worlds. A Mnemovore-enhanced Hive fleet tendril had diverted its course, its advance coordinated with chilling precision, threatening to starve an entire subsector. Valerius, now a sector commander, proposed a plan so audacious, so utterly counterintuitive, that it was initially met with incredulity by his peers and outright suspicion by the attending inquisitor. Valerius's plan hinged on creating a great deception. He proposed to feed the Mnemovore a meticulously crafted, multi-layered, false narrative, not just of battle plans, but of an entire strategic objective. He would create a fictitious relic of Saint Valerius, a potent archaeotech weapon hidden on Viridia Secundus, capable of obliterating entire Tyranid fleets. This relic would be discovered through a series of elaborate staged events, complete with forged historical data, fabricated logistical movements, and carefully selected psychic impressions left by Imperial agents specifically trained to project false information. The core of his strategy involved sacrificial minds. These were not just ordinary troops, but specially chosen volunteers, Imperial Guard officers, tech priests, and even a few minor psychers, whose minds would be painstakingly conditioned. They would be implanted with the detailed, vivid memories of the relic's discovery, its immense power, its operational protocols, and the desperate Imperial plan to activate it in a remote, heavily fortified research facility on the planet's ice caps. These false memories would be so deeply ingrained, so intrinsically linked to their personal identities, that even under Mnemovore siphoning, they would appear utterly genuine. The training was brutal. These volunteers underwent weeks of mental conditioning, memory implantation, and simulated Mnemovore attacks, learning to project the false narrative with absolute conviction. Valerius himself took part, subjecting his own mind to the torturous process, implanting a key piece of the false narrative within himself, knowing that his mind, having been touched by the mnemivore, would be a tempting target. He had to believe the lie utterly for the mnemivore to believe it. The psychological toll on these volunteers was immense. Some succumbed to madness, their minds unable to reconcile the fabricated memories with their reality. Others became living archives of a truth that did not exist, their identities permanently fragmented. Valerius watched them, a grim weight settling on his soul. He was asking these brave men and women to sacrifice not their lives, but their very minds, their sense of self, for the Imperium. As the Hive fleet drew closer, Valerius's operatives, acting as sacrificial lures, began their carefully choreographed dance. They would be intercepted by tyrannid vanguard organisms, their vital data containing the relic's false information stolen. Commander Valerius himself, positioned at a seemingly critical command post, allowed himself to be briefly exposed to the mnemivore's psychic probing, letting it siphon off the critical piece of false data he carried. The hive mind, having consumed the discovery of the relic of Saint Valerius and the desperate plan to activate it, began to shift its strategy. Its overwhelming biomass, instead of spreading across the fertile agri-plains, began to converge on the fabricated location of the relic on the ice caps, drawn by the irresistible lure of a weapon that could destroy it. The mnemivore, feeding on the deeply ingrained false memories of hundreds of imperial minds, had been tricked into believing a lie, hook, line, and sinker. Valerius, his face grim, watched the tyrannid vectors alter course. He knew the risk. If the mnemivore saw through the deception, if it detected the subtle contradictions in the fabricated memories, the consequences would be catastrophic. But for now, the hive mind, convinced it was facing an existential threat from a powerful imperial superweapon, was turning its vast intellect and its boundless hunger towards a phantom. Commander Valerius had wagered not just his own life, but the minds of his most loyal troops on a desperate gambit. He had turned the mnemivore's greatest weapon, its ability to consume and exploit knowledge, against itself, using truth and lies, memory and fabrication to create a strategic misdirection of unprecedented scale. His burden was immense, a weight of sacrificed minds and deliberate deceit, but it was a burden he carried for the Imperium, a lonely hero fighting the mind's endless hunger with the only weapon left, a lie. The stage was set for the darkest hour, the siege of Fortis Prime. This fortress world, a linchpin in the Segmentum Pacificus, was not just a military stronghold, but a vast logistical hub. Its orbital docks capable of housing entire Crusade fleets. Its planetary surface, a labyrinth of weapon manufactorums, armored foundries, and the central command nexus for an entire subsector. Its fall would mean the severing of critical supply lines, the shattering of Segmentum defenses, and a gaping maw opened into the heart of Imperial territory. The mnemivore-enhanced Hive fleet tendril that descended upon Fortis Prime was colossal, its biomass unprecedented. But its true horror lay not in its size, but in its intelligence. Having consumed countless minds and countless strategies, the hive mind now possessed a psychological profile of Fortis Prime, and its defenders more intimate than the Imperium itself. Every commander's weakness, every tactical doctrine's flaw, every historical grievance, every personal secret. All were known, all weaponized. General Cormus, the grizzled and resolute commander of Fortis Prime's defenses, was a veteran of 24 campaigns. His mind was a steel trap of strategic acumen, honed by decades of warfare. But the Mnemivore knew his history intimately. It knew of his son, lost in a botched orbital insertion, a trauma Cormus had buried under layers of stoicism. It knew of his ambition, his secret desire for a segmentum command, and his long-standing distrust of Adeptus Mechanicus oversight, viewing them as slow and dogmatic. The siege began with a relentless, overwhelming physical assault, but it was merely a prelude to the true horror. Vox channels, secured by arcane Mechanicus rights, were suddenly infiltrated, not by static or tyrannid screeches, but by the chillingly accurate voice of General Cormus's deceased son, pleading for rescue from the very orbital station where he had died, his voice laced with accusations of abandonment. The general, normally unflappable, was visibly shaken, his commands becoming hesitant, his focus fractured by the spectral tormentor. The Mnemivore orchestrated psychological warfare of unparalleled sophistication. During a critical phase of the Void battle, the fleet commander, Admiral Thula, a man whose career was built on absolute adherence to fleet doctrine, found his bridge screens flashing with encrypted communiques. These were not tyrannid transmissions, but perfectly forged imperial orders, seemingly from a higher authority, directly contradicting General Cormus's latest commands. The data within them was laced with subtle references to Admiral Thule's own doubts about Cormus's aggressive tactics, appealing to his deeply ingrained sense of protocol over intuition. The Mnemivore knew Thule would prioritize official orders, especially if they resonated with his internal disagreements. The resultant confusion in the Imperial Navy led to delayed fleet movements, allowing tyrannid bioships to breach inner defense lines. On the planetary surface, the Scutarii legions, usually unyielding, found their complex binary cant communications infiltrated by snippets of ancient, heretical machine code, logical paradoxes designed to freeze their cognitive processes, and even whispers of forgotten schisms within the machine cult itself. An entire cohort of tech priests, tasked with maintaining a crucial plasma relay, became embroiled in an internal ideological debate, convinced that their comrades were secretly adhering to forbidden archaeotech doctrines, their minds consumed by the Mnemivore-amplified whispers of ancient divisions. Critical energy conduits, vital for the planetary shield generators, were disrupted not by direct attack, but by the Mnemivore's manipulation of the tech priest's own historical records. It projected visions of a past incident where a similar conduit had overloaded due to a specific, almost forgotten design flaw, causing technicians to instinctively shut down the power to prevent a non-existent catastrophe, thus opening a breach for Tyrannid landing craft. The fortress world's deep-seated rivalries were meticulously exploited. The Cadian 101st, deployed to defend Sector Gamma, received subtle psychic intelligence, accusing the neighboring Valhallan 7th of hoarding vital anti-armor munitions from a specific supply depot, dredging up old grievances from a shared campaign. Simultaneously, the Valhallans received projections of the Cadians' officers, secretly blaming them for their sluggishness during past battles. Distrust festered, communication broke down, and coordinated fire support crumbled just as a wave of carnifexes launched a concentrated attack. General Cormus, besieged by phantom cries and contradictory intelligence, made a desperate decision. He ordered a full strategic retreat to the innermost citadel, abandoning the outer defense rings to consolidate his remaining forces, hoping to protect the core command nexus. But even this decision was anticipated. The Mnemivore, having consumed the general's history, knew his tendency to prioritize core assets in desperate situations. It had already seeded the citadel with lictors and genestealers, guiding them through long-forgotten maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts, pathways known only through archived blueprints and the memories of the long-dead engineers who built them. As the Imperial forces retreated, they fell into a meticulously laid trap. The Citadel's automated defenses, compromised by stolen access codes and corrupted servitor protocols, turned on the retreating Imperials. The inner sanctums, meant to be the last bastions of defense, became slaughterhouses. Fortis Prime, the iron heart of the subsector, was not just falling, it was being consumed from within, its own history, its own leaders' minds, and its own carefully constructed strategies turned into the deadliest weapons of the Hive mind. The darkest hour had arrived, orchestrated by a foe that not only knew every move its prey would make, but every thought, every fear, and every secret that haunted their souls. The fall of Fortis Prime was all but assured, its strategic core crumbling under the weight of an internal siege orchestrated by the Mnemivore. General Cormus, his mind battered but unbroken, retreated to the last bastion, the central command chamber, surrounded by the few remaining loyal officers and the remnants of his honor guard. Outside, the Tyranids, guided by the omnipresent psychic siphons of the Mnemivore, were closing in, turning the Citadel's own defenses against its remaining occupants. Hope was a distant, dying ember, but a whisper of hope, a carefully constructed deceit, was about to blossom into a brutal, final act. Commander Valerius, who had set his great deception into motion on Viridia Secundus, had been monitoring the Mnemivore's activity throughout the segmentum. He had seen the Hive mind, convinced of the relic of St. Valerius's existence, commit an unprecedented portion of its biomass and a vast number of Mnemivore organisms to the ice-locked world, believing it to be the key to destroying the phantom weapon. This convergence created a temporary, but critical, weakness in the broader Hive mind's synaptic network. Valerius, working in strict collaboration with Inquisitor Kyle, whose own mind still wrestled with the Eldar whispers and the personal scars of Glacius VI, had foreseen this moment. Their gambit was a colossal sacrifice, a deliberate offering of countless loyal minds, filled with expertly crafted lies, to bait the ultimate predator. The objective was not to destroy the entire Hive fleet, but to cripple the Mnemivore's specific synaptic network responsible for its devastating psychological warfare. As the Tyranid forces swarmed into the command chamber on Fortis Prime, General Cormus prepared for his last stand, his mind now clear, focused by the sheer imminence of death. He raised his power sword, ready to sell his life dearly. But just as the first wave of Tyranids crashed through the doors, a massive, system-wide psychic pulse erupted. It wasn't a Tyranid scream, nor a human one. It was something else, an agonizing, deafening roar of confusion and contradiction from within the Hive mind itself. On Viridia Secundus, Commander Valerius had activated the secondary phase of his plan. The relic of Valerius facility, now swarming with Tyranid bioforms and Mnemivores eager to consume the weapon's secrets, was a trap. Inside, instead of an archaeotech marvel, was a colossal null field generator array, specifically designed by Magos Valerius of Styges V8, not for defense, but for a singular, catastrophic offensive burst. Simultaneously, the hundreds of Imperial volunteers, whose minds had been implanted with the false relic memories, were psychically activated. These loyal minds, now willingly offered as bait, unleashed a torrent of deliberately contradictory and destabilizing psychic data, a psychic scream of interwoven lies and fabricated knowledge, all designed to overwhelm the Mnemovore's newly acquired truth. The Mnemovore's collective consciousness, so ravenous for knowledge, was suddenly gorged on a poison pill of monumental proportions. The null field array on Viridia Secundus flared, not to protect, but to amplify this psychic chaos, concentrating it, directing it like a mental scalpel. The overwhelming influx of conflicting, yet deeply believed information, coupled with the focused null field disruption, hit the Mnemovore's synaptic network like a hammer blow. It was an information overload, a psychological backlash of epic proportions. The Hive mind, having internalized the false narrative of the relic of Saint Valerius as absolute truth, found its fundamental understanding of the galaxy violently contradicted. The source of this truth, hundreds of minds it had just consumed, was now revealed to be a carefully constructed lie. This wasn't just a tactical error. It was a fundamental psychic corruption of its deepest cognitive processes. The Hive mind's new, vaunted intellectual sense, its mastery of stolen knowledge, was suddenly thrown into utter disarray. Across the segmentum, the Mnemovore bioforms convulsed. Their head clusters flickered wildly, some exploding in bursts of psychic energy. Their mental siphons recoiled, their projections of doubt and fear shattering into meaningless static. On Fortis Prime, the attacking Tyranids paused, confused. The omnipresent psychic guidance faltered. The lictors lost their stealth. The synapse creatures stumbled. It was as if a vital sense had been suddenly ripped from the Hive mind's collective consciousness. General Cormus seized the opportunity. "Now!" he roared, his voice clear and resonant, untouched by psychic taint. His remaining forces, though few, fought with renewed ferocity, exploiting the Tyranids' momentary confusion. The siege, for a crucial few hours, was turned. On Viridia Secundus, the sacrifice was complete. The null field array, having unleashed its devastating psychic counterstrike, overloaded and disintegrated in a cataclysmic explosion that vaporized the entire facility, along with the consumed Tyranid biomass and the brave Imperial volunteers who had given their minds to the deception. Their last thoughts, though fabricated, were of loyalty and sacrifice, a final act of defiance against the mind thief. Commander Valerius, watching from a safe distance, felt the psychic reverberations, the echo of hundreds of shattered minds, and knew the terrible cost of his victory. The Mnemovore's specialized synaptic network was crippled in that sector. It was not destroyed, but severely wounded. Its ability to coordinate sophisticated psychological warfare diminished. The immediate threat to Fortis Prime receded, the Tyranid assault losing its eerie precision, reverting to more conventional, albeit still brutal, attacks. The fortress world, though devastated, held. The great deception had worked. This was salvation, but it was steeped in sacrifice. The minds of countless loyal Imperial servants had been shattered, their identities warped and consumed by a deliberately fed lie, all to create a temporary schism within the collective consciousness of the Hive mind. Commander Valerius, who had orchestrated the entire plan, carried the burden of their sacrifice, a weight heavier than any physical armor. The Imperium had won a crucial battle, but the Mnemivore had learned its own grim lesson. Even stolen truth could be corrupted, and deception was a weapon that cut both ways. The path to victory was paved with shattered minds and unforgivable choices. The aftermath of the Great Deception left a gaping, raw wound across the Segmentum Pacificus. Fortis Prime, though saved from complete annihilation, was a devastated ruin, its once proud bastions reduced to rubble, its population decimated. The tyrannid tendril that had assailed it, though still a grave threat, had lost its unnerving precision. Its Mnemivore bioforms, though not eradicated, were disoriented, their psychic siphons blunted, their collective understanding of Imperial strategy fractured by the poison pill of false memories. The Mnemivore's new terrible sense, its ability to devour and weaponize knowledge, had been temporarily blinded in that sector. But the victory came at an immeasurable cost, one far deeper than mere physical destruction. The minds of the defenders of Fortis Prime, and indeed many across the affected subsectors, were forever scarred. The psychic backlash from the Mnemivore's confusion had echoed through the astropathic choir, causing widespread mental distress. Many who had been subjected to the Mnemivore's previous assaults, who had endured the whispers of doubt and the visions of past failures, now found their memories fragmented, corrupted, or replaced by phantom images and lingering paranoia. Survivors of Fortis Prime were subjected to rigorous psychological screening. Many were found to be suffering from severe cognitive dissonance, their memories unreliable, their sense of self shaken. A veteran officer might remember leading a charge that never happened, or accuse a loyal comrade of a betrayal that was entirely a Mnemivore fabrication. Trust, already a scarce commodity in the grim darkness of the far future, became almost non-existent. Fratricide, fueled by lingering Mnemivore-induced paranoia, became a grim reality in some shattered regiments. The psychological wards of the Medici facilities overflowed. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, of Imperial citizens and soldiers were afflicted with Mnemivore syndrome, a creeping madness characterized by vivid hallucinations, profound memory loss, fragmented identities, and an inability to distinguish between genuine memories and Xeno's implanted falsehoods. These unfortunate souls became living testaments to the Mnemivore's insidious power, their minds irrevocably broken, serving as grim warnings of the true nature of this new threat. Commander Valerius, the architect of the Great Deception, bore the heaviest burden. He survived, physically intact, but his mind carried the echoes of the hundreds of sacrificial volunteers. He remembered their faces, their courage, and the agony of their minds as they were willingly offered to the Mnemivore's maw. He saw the truth, not through the lens of battlefield glory, but through the profound, unshakable guilt of choices made in the name of survival. He had saved a Segmentum, but at the cost of countless souls willingly sacrificed to a lie. He became a haunted, solitary figure, his strategic brilliance tempered by a deep, melancholic wisdom. Inquisitor Kyle, observing the aftermath, found his grim resolve solidified. The Eldar's fragmented warning had resonated, and Valerius's gambit had proven its efficacy. The null field device, refined and deployed in more mobile, if still limited, forms, became an indispensable countermeasure, protecting what minds they could. But Kyle also understood the terrible ongoing cost. The Imperium had adapted, but at the expense of its own internal purity, forcing it to embrace deception and psychological manipulation on a scale previously unthinkable. The very nature of imperial intelligence gathering had to change. Secure data vaults were now air-gapped from all networks and even from direct human access, except in extreme emergencies. Knowledge became a dangerous commodity, a potential vector for mnemivore infiltration. New forms of mental discipline were enforced, turning soldiers' minds into carefully compartmentalized fortresses, though few could ever truly achieve complete protection. The Imperium, though it survived this immediate crisis, was left irrevocably changed. The grim, unshakable faith in the purity of imperial truth was shaken. The belief in the inviolability of the human mind was shattered. The war against the Tyranids was no longer just about defending borders and preserving lives. It was a desperate battle for the sanctity of identity, for the very essence of what it meant to be human. The mnemivore had revealed that the greatest threat lay not just in the ravenous hunger for flesh, but in the insidious hunger for thought, for memory, for the soul itself. The victory was hollow, leaving behind only the echoing trauma of a mind-scarred Imperium, forever haunted by the knowledge that their own history could be turned against them. The stars, cold and indifferent, bore witness to the Imperium's new, grim reality. The mnemivore, though scarred by Valerius's great deception, was far from defeated. It had retreated, yes, its localized synaptic network temporarily fractured, its ability to coordinate sophisticated psychological warfare diminished in the immediate aftermath. But the hive mind was a living, evolving entity, learning from every battle, every sacrifice, every act of defiance. The mnemivore strain continued its relentless evolution, its collective knowledge growing exponentially, becoming a permanent, insidious threat woven into the very fabric of the galactic war. The lessons learned by the hive mind from the Great Deception were profound. It now understood the concept of deliberate deception, of manufactured memories, of sacrificed minds. It adapted by developing new ways to scrutinize psychic emanations, to detect the subtle inconsistencies in fabricated data, to differentiate between genuine fear and projected falsehoods. New mnemivore bioforms, designated apisimivores by the terrified imperial savants, began to appear. These creatures were even more ethereal, their psychic siphons refined to analyze mental patterns with terrifying granularity, capable of burrowing past surface layers of implanted memories to find the raw, underlying truth of a mind. The Imperium, for its part, continued its desperate adaptations. Null field devices became ubiquitous in critical areas, though never in enough numbers. The Sisters of Silence, whose very presence dampened psychic activity, were deployed with greater frequency, becoming living bulwarks against the mnemivore's insidious whispers. Inquisitor Kyle, now a figure of legend and dread, led a desperate, fragmented crusade, pursuing every rumor, every hint of mnemivore activity, his own mind a labyrinth of self-imposed psychological defenses, forever vigilant against the enemy that had stolen his past. Commander Valerius, though lauded as a hero, remained a haunted figure. He continued to devise strategies, but his tactics were now steeped in a profound melancholy. He understood that every plan, every deception, every sacrifice only bought time, driving the hive mind to new, more terrible evolutions, He knew that the mnemivore would eventually learn to counter even the most sophisticated mental defenses, that the war was a perpetual arms race for the soul of the Imperium. The greatest fear was that the mnemivore, having consumed enough Imperial knowledge, would begin to predict not just tactical movements, but the very evolution of Imperial counter-strategies. It might learn to anticipate the development of new null field variations, or the deployment of specific mental conditioning protocols even before they were fully implemented. The concept of strategic surprise, already rare, threatened to vanish entirely. The very concept of truth became a fluid, dangerous thing. Entire sectors of Imperial space lived in a state of carefully curated paranoia, where information was hoarded, lies were commonplace, and trust was a luxury. The mnemivore had not just become a physical threat, but an existential one, eroding the very foundations of knowledge and identity that the Imperium relied upon. The future was a landscape of perpetual psychological warfare. The hive mind, with its ever-growing mental libraries of humanity's strengths and weaknesses, its triumphs and failures, its hopes and fears, had become an unparalleled psychological predator. The war against the Tyranids was now a battle for the sanctity of thought, for the purity of memory, for the very definition of what it meant to possess a conscious mind in a galaxy that sought to devour it. There would be no ultimate victory, no grand cessation of hostilities. There would only be the long war, an endless struggle against a foe that now understood its prey better than they understood themselves. The Imperium would continue to fight, to adapt, to sacrifice, to devise new deceptions and new defenses. But it would do so in a galaxy forever altered, forever shadowed by the mnemivore, the mind's endless hunger, a force that had irrevocably changed the nature of warfare, turning the Imperium's own history into its most potent weapon. And in the vast, cold void, the mnemivore continued to grow, to learn, to consume, its silent, psychic tendrils ever reaching for the next mind to devour, the next secret to weaponize.